Reaching out across the serene waters of his mind, Therin found himself growing agitated as the apparent lack of control gradually dawned on him. Trying to scrape back some semblance of self-determination, he forced open his eyes. Yet to his surprise, he did not see the stars of his last memory, but an infinite sea of mist hanging stagnant in the chilled air of this eerily empty space. Disjointed and apprehensive, Therin suddenly realized that he could not perceive any sound. Yet, just as the realization dawned, a sudden and all-encompassing orchestra of great bells rang out, reverberating from every direction in a deafening blitz of sensations and pain. However, just as they had begun in an instant, the bells fell away, leaving but a deathly silence to fill the void. Heart now pounding from his chest, Therin's eyes darted across the infinite sea, once again looking for a semblance of form. But its motions, though strong, seemed to embody the currents of chaos itself. Although as time slowly passed, a shockingly controlled pattern soon emerged as the different segments of the mist began to stir in an odd, unnatural fashion, its churning seemingly beginning to react to his very breath. Feeling a strange and sudden instability in his footing, Therin slowly looked down in horror at what he had thought was solid ground. But to his dismay, he found instead a calm yet shifting black liquid sloshing about beneath him. Panicked, Therin shifted his feet in search of what he hoped to be a more suitable foundation, but with every effort he took, the liquid beneath him riled harder. Forcing his racing heart and panic aside, Therin closed his eyes in hopes to wake himself from this nightmare. Yet no matter how hard he tried to will this horrid world away, he would always feel the same cold breath upon his skin, and he would instantly know he remained. Taking in one last breath, he tried his best to release all the remaining tension in his body. Mind silent and heart beginning to slow, he opened his eyes and exhaled. To his disdain, the environment had not returned to that of the world he was familiar, but there was a mercy, for as he instinctively looked down at the dark fluid at his feet, its surface now appeared almost completely still, not unlike the appearance you would get from polished stone. Suddenly, and without any apparent reason, all the hairs on his arms stood on end, and a chilling feeling began to rise up within his soul, until the sensation to run was all that was left. Bursting into a sudden leap, Therin struggled against the liquid, instantly reacting to his flight, its surface quickly shifting into a churning sea of rising waves and shifting winds. With every stride taken, Therin grew more confused, yet his legs refused to tire. Before long he began to wonder. What was he running from, or as he soon thought more relevant, where was he running to? Yet the sensation remained, and he felt that he must continue. Hours seemed to pass, and still he did not tire, until suddenly the feeling left him entirely. Unable to understand what was going on, Therin looked around, but the storm had gone and the sea beneath him had once again calmed. Curious, and considering that he must be stuck in a dream, Therin looked around for anything he might use to peer through the mist, yet it was of no use, for this place was as desolate as the deepest of places a man could go. Wishing to avoid a repeat of before, he took another deep breath and instead remained still as he watched the mist move around him. At first it churned, and turned about in what seemed to be an endlessly random manner, falling in on itself again and again. Yet after a time the mist had folded so much that it was gone, leaving only a black sphere the size of a fist suspended in the air. Cursed with an insatiable curiosity, Therin reached out his right hand and touched the ball. Pressed ever so slightly, the ball swiftly darted back and enlarged into a nondescript figure. A long moment passed before an unexpectedly low, cold voice thundered from the somewhat solid form. "Who stands before the shadow?" The low rumble echoed for a moment as Therin held silent, reluctant to answer.
"I don't believe we have ever met, heir to the dragon's blood."
Fighting his own fear, Therin forced the words from his mind. "What do you mean, heir of the dragon?"
"It means perhaps with training you can wield the Tal mortal, but are you the Tal'Doran? I think not. You are too dim and far too weak, yet still useful, I guess. You will serve."
Swaying on insubstantial air currents, the shadow continued to speak.
"More questions I see. Ask, all I feel of mine to answer."
Fearing what his silence would mean for his life, Therin began to speak. "What do you mean by Tal'Doran?"
"Chief of his realm, Rhin is the dragon of time, or so he would have everyone believe. But time merely flows to he who sits upon the throne. So no, he is no abstract lord or king. He is simply absent, fallen, thrown aside by that which he held most dear, leaving behind nothing more than a novel interpretation of an old idea. He was simply the first to fail, where the eight will soon follow."
The dragons, who are they and why did they fail? And by the light, what creature of the night are you supposed to be?
"Ha ha!"
The shadow laughed, billowing forth elated by his candor.
"You mortals really are short-lived. Dragons are beasts born of stardust. They have railed against my design since the beginning, and they will probably do so until the end. Like your kind, they are dim of mind and unable to see what is right in front of them. As for me, boy, I am no creature, I am death, and I am rebirth. I am the two sides of the same coin, and no matter your mind, you will serve.
Defiant, Therin raised his voice. No, I will not serve you or any creature of the shadows, be they gods or beasts. There has been much talk about magic, death, and dragons from you, so much darkness in which you speak. I am Therin Laios Ald'rune, son of Agenor Fawn Ald'rune, and I will always stand in the light.
You are no Ald'rune boy, nor should you want to be.
The shadow suddenly stopped speaking for a moment as he noticed something quite unexpected. Feeling his arms begin to burn, Therin looked down, seeing the dragons peering through the darkness. Soon there were many of them all swirling about, filling him with energy. Looking up at the shadow retreating, Therin's eyes shifted to a giant scythe forming from its reaching hand. With great speed and accuracy, the shadow charged forth and swung its mighty weapon aloft, bringing its immense heft down on Therin's head. But for some reason it stopped only a few inches away, its narrow point impacting a barrier formed of the same light beaming from the dragons burning across his body. The shadow raged and billowed before retreating once again, his weapon remaining ever pointed towards Therin's throat.
You are in my world, boy. Your towel tricks will not save you.
With great heft, the scythe was again raised in the air, but before it could come down, a brilliant light shone from Therin's heart, washing away the darkness. Jolting from his sleep as the bells rang anew, Therin looked across the room searching for danger. Yet the room was empty, save for the light of daybreak flooding through even the smallest of spaces that filled this once homely building. Reminded of the last moments of his dream, Therin looked to his arms, but the light was gone. Panicked, he turned looking for the swords he could so vividly remember, but they were also nowhere to be found. Staggering to his feet with the weight of 3 days' sleep dragging at his heels, Therin moved to the stables looking for the horses, but they too were gone. Turning back, Therin looked to the main entrance searching for signs of people's passing imprinted in the snow. Spotting what appeared to be fresh tracks, Therin figured they could be no older than a day or two. Stomach growling, Therin suddenly felt the dry sweats of thirst, so went back inside looking for his backpack. Scrounging around for longer than he liked, Therin felt dismayed that he could only find a single water skin and a few pieces of bad bread. With a sigh, he made his way to his parents' room but stopped at the door, memories of his ordeal proving a capable barrier. Regaining his strength, Therin stepped through and plucked the bow from the far wall, wrapping his hand tightly around the familiar heft. Feeling a smile, he moved to leave, but a stray thought crossed his mind. This is probably the last time I will see this place. Allowing himself a moment, Therin looked back for just long enough to imprint the memory, so that he might remember it in time. Grabbing the rest of his belongings, Therin braced himself as he reached the front door, the wind's freezing bite reminding him the hunt would not be so easy. Going through his bag, Therin pulled a length of bowstring from its contents, but sighed as the threads began to unwind at the slightest of manipulation. Casting it aside out of frustration, he suddenly remembered his father had stored some of his tools and weapons in a trunk all those years ago. Pushing the old door open one last time, Therin stepped out to the dawning brilliance of Sol blinding his eyes. Pausing to acclimatize, he focused his gaze and looked across the property, trying to think where his father might have hidden his belongings. Yet as hard as he tried, the memory remained elusive. Racking his brain, Therin almost gave up, but as he turned around, the old Taldar tree suddenly stood out. Figuring it was as good a place as any to start, Therin walked over and with a little effort, he dislodged the 9th post on the house side of the tree. Taking the roughest knife from his bag, he began to dig, yet the ground proved harder than he thought. Exerting a greater deal of energy than he would have liked, he sifted through the dirt, but nothing was there to be found. Taking a breath, Therin looked around again, knowing all too well that time was running out. Casting a glance back at the tree, he shrugged, figuring he might as well try the other side. Again he counted 9 posts down the fence and thrust his blade into the earth, and to his surprise this time it hit steel. Pulling frantically at the hard soil, he quickly pulled the box from the ground and rested it against the tree. With 3 well-placed strikes from his quickly dulling blade, the lock clicked as it fell free. Pulling back the lid, Therin's eyes fell on a blanket draped over to what appeared to be a suit of hard leather clothing lined with fur. Beside it laid at least a few hundred arrows, a few small daggers, a fighting axe, and a finely wound spool of spectra silk that looked like it would be usable in his bow. Growing emotional, Therin placed his hand on his chest and thanked his father in a way only a son could. Winds rallying, Therin quickly finished and pulled the box to the barn. Finding a table, he grabbed what arrows he could feasibly hold and bound them tightly together before placing them aside with the few daggers he could find. Pulling the silk thread from the box, Therin began to unwind it until it reached the desired length. Cutting it off with the sharpest dagger, he then did the same with 2 more lengths before placing the spool back in his bag. Focusing as best he could in this frigid cold, so ill-equipped that he was, Therin took great care as he spliced the ends, for he knew failure was most likely to happen at this very point. Finally happy with the tension, he did the same to the rest, placing the finished strings in his backpack save for the last, which he strung over the end of his father's bow. First testing the tension with little to no weight, Therin slowly drew the bow across his chest and smiled in relief as the bow bent in a smooth motion. Deciding it best to test a live arrow, he pulled a single shaft from the box and fired it into the door of the barn. Eyes wide, Therin could hardly believe how smooth of an action it was. Seems I haven't forgotten how to use a bow then. Placing it down on the table, Therin returned to the box and pulled the hard leather coat out next. Finding himself pleasantly surprised, Therin realized he must be a similar size to his father. Yet the unnerving reality that he would be wearing his father's last coat nagged at his mind. As a sudden gust of freezing air rushed through the partially open barn door, his mind was quickly decided. Pulling the coat over his shirt, Therin twisted and turned and found himself quite surprised by how flexible the leather had remained after all this time. Thanking his father once again, Therin looked back at the bundle of arrows and wondered if there was something he could find that would make them a little easier to carry. Making his way back into the house in search of his mother's sewing supplies, Therin welcomed a little luck as he noticed a half-fallen cupboard leaning precariously from the far right wall. Accidentally pulling away the entire door, hinge and all, Therin quickly realized he had found all that he would need, as well as some unused lengths of leathers. Grabbing the materials, he quickly crafted a makeshift quiver for his arrows and a few small bags for any useful supplies and medicinals he might pick up along the way. Scrounging through the rest of the house, he found a few pieces of linen he thought might come handy along with a few candles, and placed them all neatly into his bags. Having lost half the day already, Therin figured he was as ready as he would like to be, so he gathered all his supplies and began heading north towards the strange lands he had not been to in such a long time. That is, except for in his dreams. Whether it was the twin swords or the dragons from his dream drew him so, Therin needed answers, and answers he would get, for good or for bad, and with a brave smile and a whole lot of luck, maybe he would be able to catch some food to quell his rebelling stomach. 3 long hours had he walked with not a single living thing to prove his passing. However, luck had not forsaken him entirely, for he had found a small patch of snowberries and a small number of mushrooms. Yet he knew well that these small balms would not stave of his hunger for long. Stomach groaning as he finally reached the forest, Therin stopped and took a moment as the memories flooded back, but his will was like iron and his stomach was not so easily dissuaded, so he continued slipping in between trees, eyes ever vigilant and on guard as he was never sure what he had witnessed all those years ago. Spotting a lone deer far in the distance, Therin instantly froze in horror, as it looked exactly like the one he and his father had followed all those years ago. Yet even that fact alone was not enough to inspire such a reaction from his body, and then suddenly it dawned on him. This was the exact same location as when he was a boy. Heart-racing, Therin almost turned to leave, but the growls from his stomach held him still. Doing all he could to pull an arrow from the quiver, Therin prepared his shot, but as he began to control his breath, the deer suddenly grew skittish. Instincts taking hold, he held his arrow back, and seconds later the deer dashed off, darting further into the forest. Finding a faint smile growing, Therin realized he had grown a lot from back then, and at the very least he hadn't made the same mistake as his younger self. Allowing himself only a few moments to reminisce, Therin quickly found the tracks and moved off in pursuit. For a good hour, the deer ran with Therin in constant chase, but eventually the animal tired, stopping in a weary yet false sense of security. Surveying the area for danger, the deer made its gravest mistake yet, as it bowed its head to drink from the stream. Therin knew he was still quite a distance back, but he doubted he would be able to get any closer without startling the already cautious animal, so he drew the bow back and again took aim. With a low whistle, the arrow loosened and leaped into the air with great speed. Watching with anticipation as the arrow sliced through the wind, Therin suddenly heard an abrupt yet all-encompassing bell roaring all around him. Dropping to the ground with his hand over his ears, the ringing suddenly stopped. Shaking his head, Therin regained himself as he let his hand fall away, but to his surprise he found blood. Wiping it on the linen in his bag, he stood back up and tried to clean himself off as best as he could, but before he could finish, a second intense but different high-pitched roar echoed through the trees. Shaken by the sound, both Therin and the deer fell back in pure instinct. With a surprisingly loud thump, the arrow punched deep into the trunk of a tree, barely a hand's length from the deer's head. Though distracted, Therin could hardly stop a sly smile streaking across his face. "Surely you must be protected by the gods, my friend," he said, watching the animal dart back into the thick cover provided by the dense forest. Debating whether to follow, Therin found it hard to put the raw and strange sound from his mind, though admittedly he could hardly recall an animal that could produce such a sound. Yet in fact this only made his curiosity burn even brighter. Playing the noise over in his mind, Therin felt sure that it was a cry of pain, not aggression. So, with curiosity at heart and having thrown caution to the wind, Therin moved over and retrieved the wayward arrow. Eyeing the tip and then shaft for damage, he quickly placed it back in his quiver and moved northeast. For quite some time he walked, stopping only to regain his bearings and to search for clues to the mysterious sound. Therin felt a sharp and sudden gust swirling from the north. Intrigued yet still unsure, he tried to brace his stance, yet in a clumsy mass he fell hand first to the snow-sheathed forest floor. Pulling himself to his knees, Therin brushed off the snow that had clung to his coat and quickly looked to the heavens as he stood. To his shock, the sun had already fallen low in the heavens and found itself replaced by a thick cover of clouds that were begging to weep, sending a light yet sustained cover of rain that was soon accompanied by hail over the amber woods. Therin quickly moved to a large tree for shelter, knowing he would soon need to turn back. Irked, he fell against the tree, frustrated that he had neither found the source of those strange sounds, nor any sign of his father. Yet he wondered if that was not for the best, for if he had, it might bring him closer to the things that haunted his memories.